Chris Bezanoy, or Chris B, again with CSB Security Inc., with another informational video. Today we're going to talk about the access control under the ACMPR and access control under the Cannabis Act. So before we go any further, like usual, a little bit of a disclaimer. What I'm about to tell you is based on my opinion. It's based on 5 years experience, over 300 applications, over 50 attestations, dealing with a lot of fantastic integrators across the nation, security system installers, lawyers, and of course Health Canada. However, it is still based on my opinion. So let's go through a little bit of a history. When we talk about access control under the ACMPR, under the MMPR, under the Cannabis Act, we're really talking about restriction of access that Health Canada requires there to be for cannabis present rooms under the ACMPR. So, Health Canada requires that those areas, quote unquote, which is actually cannabis present areas, be restricted to persons who have a reason to be there. In other words, if you're a master grower, you have a business being inside your cultivation room. If you are a call center staff member, you have no business being inside that cultivation room. Perhaps you have staff that do trimming only. A trimming staff may not have access to your clone room, as an example. Therefore, it's restricting access to those that have a reason to be there. Health Canada also states under the ACMPR that you have to have a log of all persons entering and leaving cannabis present rooms. So in other words, Health Canada wants to see who came and went from cannabis present rooms, as well as restricting access into that room. And lastly, Health Canada requires under the ACMPR that RPICs be the ones to supervise any cannabis transactions when workers are working a room that are not security cleared. So in other words, any non-security cleared staff must be escorted and managed and watched by an RPIC when dealing with cannabis at all times. So, knowing those three things, you can imagine how people that had an application under the MMPR, a little bit under the ACMPR, that said, okay, we're going to abide by those regulations by having a high security keyway and having a written log that logs access of people coming and going from every cannabis present room in our facility. Well, as much as that may have gone over okay, as much as there may be licenses out there that have been granted, in fact I know of a few that were granted a license based on paper logs and high security keyways, it very quickly became apparent that what happens if you lose that key? What happens if an RPIC changes employment and they leave your facility, but they accidentally leave with your key? That means you have to rekey the entire facility because maybe they left with a master key, and you really don't want keys out there. Then you got to think, well, okay, I'm going to use a written log. That written log is going to log access to and from this space. Well, you have to retain written logs for 7 years. Just like other logs, some, you have to retain for 7 years. So it became very quickly apparent that, well, if I'm cultivating a room and I have 6 workers with me and I'm the RPIC, and I need to log access every single time I open the door to everybody that leaves and enters that space, well, that's potentially, 6, carry the 1 plus the square root of pi. It's potentially 50 entries in that log a day inside your facility for one room, potentially. Imagine at the end of the day, in your cultivation phase or whatever you've got going, you've got this massive facility where you've got 50 workers and 7 RPICs all logging to and from cannabis present areas using a written log. You're going to go through 100 pages in a day and store those for 7 years. So it very quickly became apparent, hey, let's use electronic access control. It's the best way to abide by the regulations, to restrict access, record those who are coming and going, make sure the RPICs are in the room first and there's no workers left inside that room and RPICs are out last. It's just a smart way of doing things, and we tend to agree. So you fast forward to the ACMPR specifically, and you require restriction of access, knowing that we're doing electronic access control now moving forward. You've got restriction of access to those that have a business to be in that space. You've got logging to and from and recording the logging to and from that space. And you're restricting access to RPICs being first in the room and RPICs out last. So, let's talk about restriction of access. Restriction of access is pretty simple under the access control systems. All you have to do is configure a access card to have a certain level of access to a space. So in other words, an RPIC may have RPIC status, and they have that status to allow them into every single cannabis present room. You may have workers that have a different status, that either worker for trim, maybe worker for grow, whatever the case may be. You can restrict access to anybody you want and give them any credential and any access to any space you want within your facility by a simple couple of clicks of a button. To get logging to and from, a long time ago what ended up happening is some integrators said, okay, no problem, we're going to put a card reader on the insecure side of the door, which is the door outside of our grow rooms or of our cannabis present rooms. We're going to put a card reader on the outside. We're going to require RPICs to swipe and pin to allow them access into the space. When they're done, they're going to leave the space and they're going to swipe and pin on the same reader they used to enter the space to log access out. That sounded good in theory until Health Canada started reviewing logs, until consultants like myself started looking at the logs and going, well, wait a second now. By sheer nature of an access control system, it only has the ability to show when access was granted or access was denied. Sometimes you can configure an access control system to let you know which reader was access granted and which reader was access denied. But if you're swiping on the same reader, all you're really showing is access granted and then access granted. Because the reader's been configured to allow access to the space. It doesn't know the difference between if you're leaving the space or entering it. It's based on the configuration of one reader. So to solve this, we put readers on both sides of all cannabis present rooms and doors. So in other words, the reader outside the room is the reader in, the reader inside the room is the reader out. Now we've got RPICs reading in and logging in, workers reading in and logging in, RPICs logging out, workers logging out, visitors in and out, the whole 9 yards. Now we're getting everybody coming and going from cannabis present areas and spaces. The challenge with that is simply the visitor. You want to make sure that your visitor does not have access granted into any space. You want to show them as access denied. Gets a little convoluted with how you log in and out, making sure the visitor doesn't set off alarms for the door because they have access denied, not access granted. The point being is that card readers on both sides of the door solve the issue for the most part. Yes, there were some challenges like I mentioned with the visitor. There's some challenges with knowing if two RPICs are in the room. There's some challenges with workers that have access to the space even though the RPICs are not there, or workers that don't have access to the space because they left and an RPIC needs to escort them in. Nonetheless, there are some systems out there that do this well. Some require a little bit of configurations. Some don't do it so well, and some you shouldn't even ever think about using. The point being, access control in and out solve two issues: restriction of access and logging to and from, and also, if configured properly, allowed an RPIC to be the first in the room and the RPIC to be the last out. So, under the ACMPR, we still need to do that. We need to log access to and from, we need to restrict access, we need to make sure RPICs are first in the room and RPICs are last out. Under the Cannabis Act, it all changes. The Cannabis Act says, well, you need to restrict access to those areas, which again are cannabis present areas. It actually doesn't say those areas. It says production space, which is a gray area, by the way. Some people consider production space to be the main entrance into your entire facility, and your entire facility may have 50 rooms in it. Some people consider to be each room a production space. Personally, knowing the history of the ACMPR, the MMPR, knowing how Health Canada thinks, I would say you're better off doing restriction of access to every single room versus one door leading into an entire facility of 50 rooms. Your choice. I would caution you on what you consider to be production space and what Health Canada considers now and in the past to be those areas or production space. Anyways, moving forward, under the Cannabis Act, you no longer need to log access of all people entering and leaving cannabis present areas except for the secured storage room. So in other words, you don't need to log access to and from that flower room. Maybe you don't want to log access to and from the dry room or the trim room. You don't need that under the Cannabis Act. You may want to as a business decision, but you no longer need it under the Cannabis Act. What does that mean? That means for any new applicants, you don't need to put a card reader on the other side of a cannabis present room door. You don't need to log access out. You no longer necessarily need to have RPICs first in the room. Under the Cannabis Act, it doesn't state RPICs must be in the room. It doesn't even state RPICs must supervise cannabis. It just states RPIC must be on site at all times. It doesn't say where on site. Just says that there must be one on site. So now you potentially don't need to log access to and from cannabis present rooms. You don't need RPIC supervision inside those rooms, therefore no RPICs first in and RPICs last out. But you still need to restrict access to those that have a business to be in that room, a reason to be inside of that room. It's still going to be electronic access control. It's just not going to be as convoluted as it is now under the ACMPR. What does that mean for existing LPs that currently abide by the ACMPR but will be ported over to the Cannabis Act? Well, that means that you can technically remove the reader inside of those rooms because you don't need them anymore. You need to tell Health Canada what you're doing. You need to put your documentation together to say, hey, by the way, we're no longer logging access to and from. We've changed our security system design, because keep in mind, LPs, if you change anything with the security system design, you must tell Health Canada what's going on. The point being is that you can, under the Cannabis Act, remove those card readers on the inside of those doors. You no longer need RPIC supervision inside those spaces. You still need to restrict access and keep logs. So, ACMPR, A little bit convoluted. If you still have an application out and trying to build out before October 17th, you still need to abide by the ACMPR. You still need to have access to and from. If you're waiting for the Cannabis Act, you don't need card readers inside those cultivation spaces, inside those cannabis present rooms, except for the secured storage room. As a best practice, a security best practice, you may want to. As a business decision, you still may want to know who's coming and going from your space. But under the Cannabis Act, you don't need it anymore. Configurations for the access control system get a lot easier. You no longer need to have RPICs inside the room first and RPICs out last. You don't need any of that kind of fun stuff. You need intrusion detection still. That's another video. I encourage you to watch it. It doesn't change much from the ACMPR to the Cannabis Act. But the point is, access control, so much easier under the Cannabis Act. It really is a large step forward, and I applaud Health Canada for realizing the access control, logging to and from, RPIC in the room first, RPIC out last, even though it was based on other regulations and QPICs and all that kind of fun stuff, it just wasn't practical in a high volume ACMPR site. If you want to find out more, definitely reach out to me. I'll answer any questions that you have. We're doing this moving forward. We're basing our designs off the Cannabis Act. You may need to do two separate system designs, one for the ACMPR, but actually build out to the Cannabis Act. We can help you with any of that. Let us know what you need. Reach out to us. Reach out to your consultants. They should know exactly what you need to do. Once again, keep following us. We always do these informational videos. We believe in information sharing. We hope to see you in the next video. And if you have any questions or if you want us to host a video of some sort, let us know. We can certainly do that also. Once again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.